She could lose everything tonight, and she didn't even hesitate. Chloe Harper wiped the grease from her hands, stepped forward, and made the decision that would change her life forever. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from, and stay with me until the very end. This story is going to take you somewhere you didn't expect. The Ford F-150 had been giving her trouble for 3 hours. Not the kind of trouble that makes a mechanic curse and kick the tire. The quiet kind, the stubborn kind, the kind that gets under your skin and refuses to let go until you figure out exactly what it's hiding. Chloe Harper had been lying on her back under the chassis since 9:30, her flashlight clamped between her teeth, her fingers reading the undercarriage the way a blind woman reads a page by feel, by pressure, by instinct, built from years of getting it wrong before she got it right. The garage was mostly empty. 2 other mechanics, Carl and Pete, had clocked out an hour ago after finishing a routine oil change on a Silverado. They'd waved at her on the way out, and she'd grunted back without pulling herself from under the truck. That was the deal at Midwest Auto Works. You finished your shift, you left. Nobody stayed late unless they had to. Chloe always had to. Not because Dave Sullivan told her to, not because the job required it, but because there was something deeply unsatisfying to her about leaving a vehicle half-diagnosed. It felt like abandoning a patient in the middle of surgery. The F-150 belonged to a retired school teacher named Margaret Calloway, who had driven it for 12 years and treated it like a member of the family. Margaret had brought it in that morning with tears in her eyes, saying it had started making a noise like something's dying inside. Chloe had promised her it would be fine by morning. She kept her promises. Okay, she muttered to herself, tapping the wrench lightly against a heat shield that had come loose near the exhaust manifold. There you are. She was reaching for her socket set when the sound hit her. Not gradually, not politely. It came like a fist through a wall, a deep, thundering roar that rattled the garage door and its frame bounced off the concrete floor and vibrated in Chloe's chest like a second heartbeat. She froze for a half second beneath the truck, listening. The engine was rough, misfiring at odd intervals with a sharp mechanical clicking underneath the rumble that told her something was seriously wrong. Then the roar died, and the silence it left behind felt heavier than the sound itself. She heard boots on concrete, heavy, deliberate, the kind of steps that didn't ask permission to enter a room. Chloe slid herself out from under the F-150 on her creeper, sat up, and pushed her safety glasses up on her forehead. She blinked against the overhead fluorescent lights. The man standing in the entrance of the garage was not small. He was well over 6 feet broad through the shoulders in the way that it suggested not gym muscle, but the kind of physical mass a man builds through decades of physical labor and hard living. His hair was dark and pulled back. His forearms crossed over his chest. As he scanned, the garage were mapped with tattoos. Not the decorative kind, but the dense layered storytelling kind that accumulate over years. He wore a leather vest over a dark shirt, and the patch on the back of that vest was not something Chloe needed to read twice. Hell's Angels, Chicago chapter. She knew the patch. Everybody in this part of the city knew the patch. Behind him, just inside the garage door, sat a Harley Davidson that had clearly been rode hard. It was leaning on its kickstand at a slightly uneven angle, and even from 20 feet away, Chloe could see it wasn't sitting right. Something mechanical was wrong with it. Several things, maybe. The man turned and saw her. His eyes were pale, almost gray, and they moved over her face the way a man's eyes move when he's trying to determine something quickly. Friend or threat, help or obstacle. He was in his mid-40s, she guessed, and his face carried the particular kind of exhaustion that wasn't about sleep. It was deeper than that, the kind of tired you feel when something you love is in danger and you can't get to it. You a mechanic? He asked. His voice was low, graveled, controlled, but underneath the control there was something pressing against the surface. I am, Chloe said. She stood up, pulling a rag from her back pocket and wiping her hands without thinking about it. What's going on with the bike? It died on me, he said. 6 blocks from here. Pushed it. She looked past him at the Harley. Pushed it 6 blocks. She registered that. The bike was heavy. The man was big, but 6 blocks was 6 blocks. He must have been desperate. What happened before it died? Any warning signs? It's been rough for about 20 miles. Thought I could make it. He paused and something shifted in his expression, a brief crack in the controlled surface just wide enough to let her see what was underneath. I need it running. Tonight. Right now. Tonight, she repeated not skeptically, just factually. It was 10:47 p.m. The garage officially closed at 10. My daughter, he said, and then stopped. He pulled his phone from his vest pocket and looked at the screen. Reflex, not intention, the gesture of a man who kept checking for news he was terrified to receive. The screen was lit with notifications. He put it back. She's in the hospital. Car accident. Cook County Medical. I've been trying to get there for 2 hours. He said it flatly, not in asking for sympathy, just explaining the situation the way a person explains a situation when they're operating beyond the point where feelings are a luxury. Chloe looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Roll it in." She pointed toward the second bay, the empty one, and turned to get her diagnostic equipment from the tool cart. Behind her, she heard the man walk back to the Harley and begin wheeling it toward the bay. The bike was heavy. She could hear the effort in his footsteps, the slight scrape of the wheel on concrete. "Hey." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not quite gratitude. More like wariness mixed with something that wanted to be relief but wasn't ready to be yet. "I'm Jack," he said. "Chloe." She turned back to her tool cart. "Let's figure out what's wrong with your bike." She had the Harley on the center stand and her diagnostic reader plugged in within 4 minutes. While the reader ran its cycle, she walked the bike visually, starting at the front and working back, hands moving along the frame, checking for obvious damage, looking for anything that shouldn't be there or wasn't where it should be. Jack stood to the side, arms crossed, watching her work. He checked his phone twice more. "You want to call the hospital while I work?" she said without looking up. "See how she's doing." A pause. "Yeah." He moved toward the garage door where the reception was probably better, and she heard him dial. The diagnostic reader beeped. She looked at the results and felt the clinical part of her brain lock in immediately. Contaminated fuel system consistent with water or debris in the tank. And a fault code pointing to the ignition coil secondary circuit. The bike had been running on compromised fuel and a failing ignition system, and it had made it 20 miles before it finally quit. That was actually impressive in a grim way. She moved to the tool cart and started pulling what she needed. Jack came back. She didn't look up. "They said she's stable," he said. "For now." He said the last 2 words with the particular emphasis of a man who knows exactly how much weight they carry. "Stable is good," Chloe said. "That's the word you want to hear." "It's not the word I want to hear." His voice was rough. "I want to hear she's awake and asking for me. I want to hear she's fine." He stopped. "I want to get there." "Then let me work." She pulled the fuel filter and knew immediately from the look of it that it was heavily contaminated, dark murky, with visible particulate matter clogging the screen. Someone somewhere had gotten bad fuel, possibly water infiltration in a tank somewhere in the supply chain, or contamination from a dirty fuel container. She set it aside and reached for a replacement from the supply cabinet. "How long?" Jack asked. "Stop asking me that," she said, not unkindly. "Every time you ask, I have to answer, and every second I spend answering is a second I'm not working." She glanced at him just long enough to make eye contact. "I will get you there, but I need you to let me work." He was quiet for a moment, then quietly, "Okay." She heard him settle onto a stool near the workbench behind her. He didn't pace. She gave him credit for that. Men in situations like this, terrified, helpless, waiting on someone else, usually paced. He sat and he was still, and she could feel him watching her work with the focused intensity of a man who had learned that trust was something you extended one increment at a time. She was on the ignition coil when the side door opened. She knew from the sound of the footsteps. She'd heard those footsteps for 5 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, the particular heavy-heeled authority stomp of a man who wanted you to hear him coming. She didn't turn around. She kept working. "Harper." Dave Sullivan's voice was the kind of voice that came preloaded with displeasure. He was 52, stocky, with the permanent squint of a man who had spent 30 years looking at things he disapproved of. He was in street clothes, dark slacks, a collared shirt, which meant someone had called him. One of the other mechanics, probably. Carl, most likely. Carl had been wanting her probationary slot to go to his nephew since before she'd even started. "Sullivan," she said, still not turning around. "Garage closed 45 minutes ago." His footsteps stopped behind her. "What is this?" "I'm finishing the Callaway repair and working an emergency call that came in at, we don't do emergency calls after 10, Sullivan said. "That's policy. That's been policy for them." "The man needs to get to his daughter," Chloe said. She pulled the old ignition coil free and set it on the workbench with a controlled precision that she was aware communicated more than she intended. "She's in the hospital. Cook County Medical. Car accident." A pause. She could feel him looking at Jack. She could feel Jack looking at him. "That's not our problem," Sullivan said. We have liability protocols. We have insurance limitations on after hours. Dave, she turned around. She kept her voice level, calm, the way you kept your voice when you were talking to someone who had power over you, and you needed them to hear the content of what you were saying rather than react to the tone. I understand the policy. I understand I'm on probation. I understand what this could mean for me. She held his gaze. I'm doing it anyway. Sullivan's jaw tightened. He looked at Jack again, the leather vest, the tattoos, the patch, and something moved through his expression that Chloe recognized and didn't like. It was the particular calculation of a man deciding that someone's appearance was a sufficient reason to let them fail. I'll need you to step off the property, sir, Sullivan said to Jack. Jack stood up from the stool. He was a head taller than Sullivan, and the quality of stillness he brought to the act of standing was not aggressive exactly, but it occupied the room in a way that Sullivan clearly hadn't anticipated. My daughter is in the hospital, he said. His voice was quiet, quieter than Chloe expected. This woman is fixing my bike so I can get to her. I'm not going anywhere until she's done. Sullivan turned back to Chloe. His voice dropped, and the threat in it was no longer implied. If you don't stop working on this vehicle and ask this man to leave the premises, I will have you off the payroll by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You understand me? You're 3 weeks from finishing your probation. 3 weeks. Think about what you're doing. The garage was completely quiet. Carl and Pete had apparently told someone, and that someone had told Sullivan, but that was all that had happened because the garage was empty except for the three of them and the F-150 and the Harley and the particular quality of silence that settles over a moment when something irreversible is about to happen. Chloe looked at Sullivan. She thought about the 5 months and 3 weeks. The early mornings, the late nights, the repairs she'd done right the first time when the senior mechanics had missed them. She thought about her rent, which was not cheap, and her student loans, which were not small, and the 3 weeks she'd been from finishing probation and being given the full-time rate. She looked at Jack, who had his eyes on her with the expression of a man who was witnessing something he hadn't expected and didn't know how to process a person choosing to pay a cost on his behalf. His jaw was tight. He looked like he was about to say something, to tell her to stop, to tell her it was all right, that he'd figure something else out. She turned back to the Harley. I understand you, she said to Sullivan, and reached for the new ignition coil. The silence behind her lasted about 4 seconds. Then she heard Sullivan's footsteps, and they were heading toward the door. You're done here, Harper, he said. I'm calling it in tonight. Effective immediately. The door closed. Chloe kept working. Jack was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him watching her with a different quality of attention. Now something had changed in it. She wasn't sure what he was feeling, and she didn't have time to figure it out. You didn't have to do that, he finally said. I know. He's going to fire you. Sounds like. She was seating the new coil, checking the connection points with focused precision. Doesn't change what I'm doing. Why? It wasn't a challenge. It was genuine, a man trying to understand something that didn't fit his framework. She paused for just a second, not long. Then she said, because your daughter is in the hospital and you need to get to her. That's why. That's the whole reason. He didn't say anything for a while after that. She worked. The garage hummed around her, the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of the city outside, the particular industrial silence of a space built for machines. She changed out the fuel filter, flushed the fuel line, replaced the contaminated fuel that had made it through to the car bowl, cleaned the ignition points, and ran a continuity check on the secondary circuit to confirm the coil was going to hold. How old is she? Chloe asked while she worked. 16, Jack said. The word had a specific weight to it. She was coming home from her friend's house. Guy ran a red light. Was she alone in the car? Yeah, he paused. Her mom and I were not together anymore. She was living with me this month, taking turns. Another pause. I'm the one who was supposed to pick her up. I told her I'd be there by 7. His voice flattened. I got the call at 7:30. Chloe kept her hands moving and said nothing. She understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had grown up in a family built on service and sacrifice, exactly what that sentence meant. The particular torture of almost. The 7:30 that came after the 7 that didn't. She's going to be okay, Chloe said. Stable means she's fighting. 16-year-olds are tough. I should be there, Jack said. You're going to be. She straightened, checked her work, and ran the diagnostic reader one more time. The fault codes were clear. The fuel system read clean. She reached for the ignition key on the bench where Jack had left it when he wheeled the bike in. I want to run it for 2 minutes before you take it, just to confirm the coil's holding under load. He nodded. The Harley started on the first try. The sound filled the garage clean and even and powerful, that particular throb of a well-tuned engine that sounds almost like breathing. No misfire, no clicking. The RPMs held steady as Chloe brought it up slightly and then back down, reading the sound the way she read everything, listening for anything that wasn't right. There was nothing wrong. The bike was running clean. She cut the engine and looked at Jack. He was looking at this bike with an expression that was complicated in ways she didn't try to parse. Then he looked at her. His face was not a soft face. It was not a face that had practiced gratitude in the mirror or that was accustomed to being in situations where it needed to. But something in it was open in a way that it hadn't been when he'd walked in. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "Nothing," Chloe said. She was already moving toward the tool cart, beginning to clean up. "Go." "Chloe." Her name and his voice had a different texture than when he'd first said it. "I don't forget things like this." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I don't do things like this because I want them remembered." She turned back to the tool cart. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Go see your daughter." She heard him pick up the key from where she'd set it. She heard him walk to the bike. She heard the Harley come to life again, that deep, even repaired and running sound that settled something in her chest, even though the rest of her chest was a complicated mess of exhaustion and adrenaline, and the dawning reality of what she had just done to her own life. She listened to the Harley roll out of the bay. She listened to it accelerate out of the parking lot, the sound fading toward the south, toward Cook County Medical, until it was swallowed by the city. Then it was just the fluorescent lights and the F-150 and the smell of grease and burned fuel, and Chloe Harper standing in the middle of a garage she was no longer employed in, with a fuel filter in her hand and no particular regret in her heart. She set down the filter. She picked up her wrench. She went back to the F-150, slid under it on the creeper, clamped the flashlight between her teeth, and finished diagnosing Margaret Calloway's heat shield. If she was going to leave this place, she was going to leave it with the work done. All of it. She worked for another 40 minutes in silence, alone with the city pressing against the garage walls, and the night doing what nights do. Deepening, settling, carrying the particular weight of choices made and consequences approaching. When she finally finished, she lay under the truck for a moment without moving. She thought about 3 weeks. She thought about Jack's face when the bike started. She thought about a 16-year-old girl in a hospital bed somewhere across the city and a father riding toward her through the Chicago night on a repaired Harley, and the specific irreducible fact that she had made that possible. Then she slid out from under the truck, stood up, turned off the overhead lights, and walked out of the garage into the October air. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She didn't check it. Whatever Sullivan had sent could wait until morning. The parking lot was empty. The city was everywhere around her, sound and light and motion, that particular urban aliveness that never entirely stops. She stood for a moment, feeling the cold feeling, the exhaustion in her shoulders, and her lower back feeling something else too, something quieter and harder to name. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not peace. Something more like the specific rightness of a person who has acted in alignment with who they are regardless of cost. She had built herself around a belief, simple, non-negotiable, tested in small ways her entire adult life, that the right thing was the right thing and that the price of it was irrelevant to the question of whether to do it. Tonight, that belief had cost her something real, and she still believed it. She started walking toward her car keys in hand, shoulders square, moving through the Chicago night like a woman who had made her choice and was ready to live with it, every consequence, every consequence, every morning that came after. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the phone call that would come in the morning, or the office she would be called to, or the name she would hear spoken in a context that would reframe everything she thought she understood about the night she just lived through. She just knew the bike was running, and that Jack Ryder was on it, and that somewhere across the city, a girl named Lily was waiting for her father to come through a hospital door. That was enough. That had always been enough. She didn't sleep well. That wasn't a surprise. Chloe had known walking to her car the night before that sleep was going to be the kind that comes in fragments, an hour here, 40 minutes there. The rest of the night spent staring at the ceiling with the particular alertness of a brain that refuses to stop processing what the body wants to leave alone. She'd been right. She'd gotten home a little after midnight, stood in her kitchen drinking water she didn't taste, and then lain in bed with her eyes open until sometime around 2, when exhaustion finally overruled anxiety and pulled her under. She was awake again at 5:40. Her phone was on the nightstand and she looked at it the way you look at something you know is going to tell you something you don't want to hear. 3 messages from Sullivan sent between 11 p.m. and midnight. She didn't read them in order. She skipped straight to the last one. Effective immediately, your employment with Midwest Auto Works is terminated. Per your probationary agreement, no severance applies. Your personal tools may be collected between 9 and 11 a.m. on a scheduled date. Do not report for your shift tomorrow. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, and made coffee. She stood at the counter while it brewed, and she didn't think about anything in particular. She just stood there in the quiet of her apartment in the early dark of a Chicago October morning and let the reality of the situation settle around her the way cold air settles. She was unemployed. She had been unemployed for approximately 7 hours. She poured her coffee, wrapped both hands around the mug, and tried to calculate. Rent was due in 19 days. She had enough in checking to cover it barely. She had a small amount in savings, enough to buy herself maybe 6 weeks before things got genuinely difficult. She'd been in worse spots. Not much worse, but worse. She'd gotten through those. She'd get through this. The coffee was hot, and she drank it too fast and burned the roof of her mouth. She was sitting at her kitchen table, her phone in front of her, trying to decide whether to start calling shops today or wait until a decent hour when the phone rang. Not a text, a call. She didn't recognize the number. Chicago area code, but not a contact she had. She almost let it go to voicemail. It was 6:14 in the morning, and nothing good called at 6:14 in the morning. But something made her pick up. She didn't know what. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had made her step forward toward Jack Ryder's broken bike the night before. Hello, is this Chloe Harper? The voice was male, professionally modulated, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who spent a lot of time on the phone and had learned to make every call sound important without sounding rushed. Depends who's asking, she said. A brief pause, surprise maybe, or recalibrating. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm executive assistant to Thomas Ellison, CEO of Ellison Automotive Group. Another pause shorter. Mr. Ellison would like to speak with you this morning if you're available, at your earliest convenience. Chloe set down her coffee cup very carefully. Ellison Automotive Group. She knew the name. Everyone in the Chicago automotive industry knew the name. It was one of the largest privately held automotive service chains in the Midwest, 43 locations, including 3 in Chicago proper. Midwest Auto Works, the garage where she had been employed until approximately 7 hours ago, was one of those locations. Thomas Ellison was her boss's boss's boss. What does Mr. Ellison want to speak with me about? She asked. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. He'll explain when you meet, Marcus said. Would 9 o'clock work? Our offices are at 1420 West Monroe. I can be there at 9, Chloe said. She spent 20 minutes after the call sitting at the kitchen table, turning the coffee mug in her hands and trying to understand what was happening. The CEO of Ellison Automotive Group didn't call former probationary mechanics at 6 in the morning unless something significant had occurred. The list of things that could connect last night's events to a 9 a.m. meeting with a CEO was, she realized, very short. She showered, dressed carefully. Not the most formal thing she owned, but professional clean, the kind of outfit that said she took things seriously without trying too hard. She left her apartment at 8:15 and drove toward Monroe Street, and she spent the drive thinking about Jack Ryder and about what he'd said before he left. I don't forget things like this. She hadn't done it to be remembered. She had meant that. But intentions and consequences were different things, and consequences, it turned out, didn't ask for your intentions before they arrived. The offices of Ellison Automotive Group were on the 14th floor of a building on West Monroe, and they looked exactly like the offices of a company that managed 43 locations and several hundred employees, clean, purposeful, organized in the particular way that money organizes things when it's been around long enough to know what it wants. Marcus Webb met her in the lobby, shook her hand, and walked her toward a conference room with large windows that looked north toward the river. Thomas Ellison was already in the room. He was 61, she would later learn. He looked it in some ways and didn't in others. He was tall with the kind of compact physical authority that some men carry regardless of age. His hair was silver and cut close. He was in a dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open. He was standing at the window when she came in, and he turned, and she got her first look at his face. She saw it immediately. The eyes, pale, almost gray, the same quality of stillness in them, the same assessment behind them. Different context, different life, different decade, but the same fundamental structure of a face. The same bones, Jack Ryder's brother. Ms. Harper, Thomas Ellison said and extended his hand. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, she said, shaking it. His grip was firm and brief and told her nothing. Please sit down. He gestured toward the conference table. She sat. He sat across from her, not at the head of the table, but directly across which she registered. An equal configuration, he'd chosen it deliberately. I'm going to get directly to the point, he said, because I think that's the kind of conversation we should have. And I think based on what I know about you that you'll appreciate it. I do, she said. He folded his hands on the table. My brother called me this morning at 5:30. He told me what happened last night. He paused and something moved through his expression, not quite emotion or maybe too much of it, compressed into too small a space to read easily. He told me about his bike. He told me about Dave Sullivan. He told me what you said to Sullivan and he told me what you did after. Another pause. He told me you went back to the other repair job after he left. The F-150 needed a heat shield repair, Chloe said. I told the owner it would be ready by morning. I wasn't going to leave it half done. Thomas Ellison looked at her for a moment with an expression she was starting to be able to read. It was the look of a man confirming something he'd already been told and finding that it matched. How is Lily? Chloe asked. Your niece. Something shifted in his face, softened slightly. She has a fractured wrist and a moderate concussion. They're keeping her one more day for observation, but the doctors expect a full recovery. He looked at her steadily. She was awake when Jack got there. He was with her by midnight. He paused. Because of you. Chloe said nothing. She didn't know what to say to that, and she'd learned a long time ago that silence was better than the wrong words. I want to ask you something, Thomas said, and I'd like an honest answer. I'll give you one. When Sullivan threatened your job last night, when he told you that you had 3 weeks left of probation and that he'd terminate you on the spot, what went through your head? She thought about it for a second, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to give him the real one instead of the polished one. I thought about my rent, she said. I thought about my loans. I thought about the fact that I'd been there 5 months and I'd done good work, and it seemed like a significant thing to lose. She met his gaze. And then I thought about a man who'd pushed a broken Harley 6 blocks because he was trying to get to his kid, and the math wasn't complicated after that. Thomas Ellison was quiet for a moment. Dave Sullivan has managed that location for 11 years, he said. He has been with his company for 19. He is on paper a competent manager. Numbers are solid, customer complaints are within acceptable range, turnover is manageable. He paused. He is also, I've come to understand through this morning's conversation with my brother, the kind of manager who looks at a Hell's Angels patch and decides that the person wearing it doesn't deserve the same service we'd give anyone else. His voice hadn't changed in volume or temperature, but something in it had. Chloe said nothing. That's not the kind of management I want in my shops, Thomas said. She looked at him carefully. What are you telling me? He uncapped a pen, set it on the table. I'm offering you a position, lead technician, Midwest Auto Works location, the same shop. Full authority over the service floor, diagnostic assignments, technicians, scheduling, quality control. Salary of $82,000 with a performance review at 6 months. He let that sit for a second. Sullivan is being reassigned effective this morning. Not fired, I want to be honest with you about that. He's moving to an administrative role. But he will not be your manager, and he will not be managing any service team in this company going forward. Chloe sat very still. 82,000 was not a number she had been earning. It was not a number she had been expecting to earn for several years yet. It was a lead technician number, a senior number, the kind of salary that came after proving yourself for a decade. She was 26. Why, she asked. Thomas raised an eyebrow slightly. Why the offer? Why now? Why this level? I'm 26 and I have 5 months with the company. You could promote someone senior, someone with more tenure, and it would make more institutional sense. She kept her voice direct. I want to understand what you're actually offering me and why. He looked at her steadily, and she had the sense that he was revising something upward. Because I've spent 30 years building this company, he said, and the single most important thing I've learned in 30 years is that you cannot teach character. You can teach a person to diagnose an engine. You can teach them the systems, the procedures, the processes. You can't teach them to push back against a manager at 11 p.m. when they have 3 weeks of probation left and a scared father who needs help. He paused. I don't find that in people every month. When I find it, I don't wait for it to prove itself incrementally over years. The conference room was quiet. I'll need 24 hours, Chloe said. He nodded. Of course. He slid a card across the table, his direct line, she assumed. Marcus can answer any procedural questions. Benefits package, start date, team structure. He stood and she stood. He extended his hand again. Whatever you decide, Ms. Harper, what you did for my brother last night was not something I'm able to repay. The offer is real, and it's yours if you want it, but it's separate from my gratitude. I want you to know that. She shook his hand. Is Lily going to be okay, really okay? His expression changed again in that same compressed way. Too much feeling, too small space. She's 16 and she's tough, he said. Her father's kid. A pause. She'll be fine. Chloe left the office, rode the elevator down 14 floors, walked through the lobby and out onto West Monroe and stood on the sidewalk in the October morning air, with Thomas Ellison's business card in her hand and her brain running at a speed that was slightly beyond comfortable. She called her mother. Patricia Harper answered on the second ring with the particular alertness of a woman who had raised 2 children alone and had never fully stopped waiting for the calls that required her to be alert. Chloe, it's 9:30. Are you at work? No, Chloe said. I'm not at work. She walked toward where she'd parked her car, moving through the morning foot traffic without fully registering it. I need to tell you something, a couple of somethings actually. Start with the worst one, her mother said without hesitation. 26 years of Patricia Harper. I got fired last night. A pause. Okay, what's the second thing? I just left a meeting with the CEO of the company. He offered me lead technician. The pause this time was longer. Chloe Marie Harper, her mother said finally in the voice that had exactly 3 registers. Pride, exasperation, and some combination of both that didn't have a name. This was the 3rd register. Tell me everything. She told her, standing by her car, then sitting in her car, then sitting in her car with the engine off because she wasn't ready to drive yet. She told her about the Harley coming in, about Jack, about Sullivan, about what she'd said to Sullivan and what she'd done after, about the F-150 and Margaret Calloway's heat shield, and going back to finish it alone in the garage, about the phone call at 6:14, about Thomas Ellison's eyes and what she'd recognized in them. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was one of Patricia's many underrated skills. When Chloe finished, there was a moment of quiet on the line. You knew he could fire you, her mother said. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes, because it was right. Yes. Another pause. You are, Patricia Harper said, the most stubborn, most principled, most exhausting person I have ever raised. I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Her voice changed slightly, the specific softness that only came through a few times a year, the voice underneath the capable, pragmatic, practical voice. Your grandfather would have done exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing, Chloe, and I want you to know that. Chloe felt something move through her chest that was not quite a feeling she had a name for. Her grandfather, Robert Harper, mechanic, Korean War veteran, a man who had fixed engines in a shop in Bridgeport for 40 years and charged less than he should have for people he could tell couldn't afford more, had died when she was 14. But she'd spent the first 14 years of her life watching him, and she had understood even then that what he was teaching her was not only mechanical. I know, she said quietly. Take the job, her mother said. I haven't decided yet. Chloe. Mom. Take the job. She almost laughed. I'll call you tonight. You'll call me this afternoon, Patricia said firmly, and you'll tell me you took it. She hung up and sat in the car for a while longer. The city moved around her traffic pedestrians, the particular rhythm of a Chicago morning, doing what Chicago mornings do. She thought about Sullivan's face when she turned back to the bike. She thought about Jack sitting on that stool checking his phone, trying to hold himself together with the specific discipline of a man who had learned that falling apart didn't help anything. She thought about Lily, a girl she'd never met, a 16-year-old she would never be able to pick out of a crowd lying in a bed at Cook County Medical and with a fractured wrist and a concussion waiting for her father to come through the door. And she thought about the bike starting, that clean, even sound, that immediate, undeniable proof that the work had been done right. She thought about the drive to find a new job, the interviews, the questions about why she'd left her last position and what she'd say, the months of proving herself again to a new set of people from the bottom of a new hierarchy. She thought about walking back into Midwest Auto Works as its lead technician with authority over the floor, and sitting down across from the team she'd worked beside for 5 months, Carl included, and beginning the work of being something different than she'd been the night before. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't have saved, but she recognized the area code and something in her went still. Jack Ryder, Lily woke up asking for pancakes this morning. Doc says she goes home tomorrow. I don't forget. Jay. She read it twice. Then she looked up at the windshield at the Chicago morning beyond it, at the sky that was doing that specific October thing where it can't quite decide if it's going to open up or hold. She saved the number. She started the car. She thought about lead technician. She thought about 82,000. She thought about a service floor. She already knew a diagnostic process. She'd already mastered a team she understood in ways that took years to build. She thought about doing the work she loved at the level it deserved to be done at, with the authority to do it right. She thought about the heat shield on Margaret Calloway's F-150, finished and fitted and solid at 11:40 p.m. in an empty garage. She thought about what her grandfather had told her once when she was 11, sitting on an upturned crate in his Bridgeport shop with oil on her hands and a look on her face that he'd apparently been able to read. Chloe, he'd said, setting down his wrench and looking at her with those steady eyes that had seen everything and judged very little. A person who does good work and does right by people ends up exactly where they're supposed to be. It might take a while, it almost always takes a while, but they end up there. She'd thought about that sentence maybe 1,000 times in 15 years. In every shop she'd trained in, every test she'd passed, every repair she'd got right after getting it wrong, every moment of doubt about whether she was in the right profession, the right city, the right life. She was 26 years old. She was unemployed for exactly 3 hours and 41 minutes, and she was about to become a lead technician. She pulled out of the parking spot and drove north, and the city held its particular morning noise around her, and she drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and something that felt a lot like clarity settling in her chest, quiet and solid and real. She was going to call Thomas Ellison's number when she got home. She was going to accept the position. And then she was going to go to the garage that had fired her 11 hours ago, walk through that door, and get to work. She called Thomas Ellison at 10:47 that morning. Marcus Webb answered, put her on hold for exactly 90 seconds, and then Thomas's voice came through calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been expecting the call and had decided in advance not to make her feel rushed about having taken the time she asked for. Ms. Harper. I'll take the position, Chloe said. No preamble, no thank you speech, just the answer clean and direct the way she gave every answer that mattered. A brief pause. Not surprise, more like the specific quality of silence that follows confirmation of something hoped for. Good, Thomas said. I'm glad. Another pause. How soon can you start? Tomorrow morning, she said. 7 a.m. This time the pause had something different in it. Most people ask for a week, he said. I know the shop, she said. I know the team. I know the systems. I know the current job queue. A week of transition time would just be a week of Margaret Calloway not getting her F-150 back. A beat. I finished the repair last night before I left. It should be in the system for customer pickup. Someone needs to make sure that call goes out today. The sound Thomas Ellison made was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a man who had just received additional confirmation of something he'd already decided. I'll have Marcus send you the paperwork this afternoon. Benefits enrollment, payroll setup, the revised org chart. He paused. Chloe, one more thing. Yes. The team doesn't know yet. Sullivan was informed this morning. Morning, he's not coming in. As of tomorrow, they'll hear it from you as their new lead. He let that sit for a second. I'll have Marcus draft a brief communication, but I want the floor introduction to come from you directly. How you handle that first morning is yours to own. She thought about Carl. She thought about Pete. She thought about the 3 other mechanics she'd worked beside Danny Rosa, and Marcus, not the assistant, who everyone called Big M to avoid confusion. She thought about 5 months of being the newest, the youngest, the one on probation, the one people watched without fully welcoming. She thought about what it meant to walk back into that room as something different. Understood, she said. Good luck, Thomas said, and he said it like he meant it and like he didn't think she'd need much of it. She hung up and sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then she went to her kitchen, made a second cup of coffee, and started making a list. She had 14 hours to prepare for the most important first day of her professional life. She used them. She pulled up everything she had access to the shop's current job queue from the customer management portal, the parts inventory she'd mentally cataloged over 5 months, the scheduled maintenance appointments for the next 2 weeks. She went through the open tickets